What happens when a beloved television actor sits down for what should be a friendly chat on daytime television, only to find himself ambushed by a host who seems determined to tear him down? In just 35 seconds of one specific comment, Denise Welch's attempt to belittle Ralf Little would backfire so spectacularly that it would end with the guest walking off set, leaving the entire panel in stunned silence. It started like any other segment on Loose Women. The studio lights were bright, the audience was warmed up, and Ralf Little walked onto the set with a smile, waving to the crowd. He was there to talk about his role in Death in Paradise, the show that had brought him back into the spotlight and made him a household name all over again. The panel that day consisted of Denise Welch, Ruth Langsford, Jane Moore, Nadia Sawalha. They all greeted him warmly, or so it seemed. Denise was the one leading the interview. She sat there with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, her notes spread out in front of her. Right from the start, something felt off. Ralf settled into his seat, still smiling, still trying to be gracious, but Denise wasn't interested in pleasantries. "So Ralf," Denise began, leaning forward with that practiced television host lean. "Death in Paradise. Lovely show. Tropical beaches. Not exactly what I'd call challenging work, though, is it?" The audience shifted uncomfortably. Ralph's smile faltered for just a second before he recovered. "Well, I mean, it's actually quite demanding. We're filming in intense heat, long days, and the scripts are really clever. There's a lot of—" "Oh, come on," Denise interrupted, waving her hand dismissively. "You're in the Caribbean getting a tan. Hardly Shakespeare, is it? I mean, let's be honest about what it is." Ruth Langsford glanced at Denise with a look that said she wasn't sure where this was going. Jane Moore looked down at her notes. Nadia shifted in her seat, but Denise kept going. Ralf took a breath. "I think you're underselling it a bit. The show has a massive following, and the writing is actually really intricate. We're solving murders. There's character development." "Character development," Denise repeated, her tone dripping with condescension. "Right, because playing a detective on a beach requires such range." Now the audience was silent. This wasn't playful banter. This was something else entirely. Ralph's jaw tightened, but he kept his composure. "I'm not sure what you want me to say, Denise. I'm proud of the work we do. The crew works incredibly hard, and we've built something that millions of people love. Millions of people love a lot of things." Denise shot back. "Doesn't make them art, does it? I mean, people love reality TV. People love fast food. Doesn't mean it's good for you." Ruth finally spoke up. "Denise, I think that's a bit—" But Denise wasn't done. "No, Ruth. Let's have an honest conversation. Ralf, you were in the royal family. That was brilliant. That was actually good television. This detective show, it's just a paycheck, isn't it? Just a nice little holiday that happens to have cameras." The way she said, "nice little holiday," made it sound like an insult. Ralph's expression changed. The polite smile was gone now. "You know what, Denise? I came here to talk about a show I care about, with a cast and crew I respect deeply. If you're not interested in having an actual conversation, then I'm not sure why I'm here." "Oh, don't be so sensitive," Denise said, laughing in a way that felt cruel. "I'm just asking questions. Can't handle a bit of criticism?" "There's criticism, and then there's just being rude for the sake of it," Ralf replied, his voice steady but firm. "You've done nothing but put down the show, put down the work, and frankly, put down me since I sat down." Nadia tried to jump in. "Maybe we can talk about what you love about the character." But Denise cut her off. "No, I want to know why Ralf is getting so defensive. It's a simple question. Is this just an easy job that pays well? Or are you actually trying to pretend it's more than that?" The audience gasped. Even Ruth looked shocked. Jane Moore's mouth was literally hanging open. This had crossed a line, and everyone in the studio knew it. Ralf stared at Denise for a long moment. "You know what? I don't think you're interested in my answer. I think you decided before I even walked out here that you were going to tear me down, and I'm not going to sit here and let you do it." "Oh, here we go," Denise said, rolling her eyes. "The celebrity storming off. How original." "No," Ralf said, his voice rising slightly. "Here we go with a talk show host who's forgotten that guests are people, not punching bags for whatever point you're trying to make. You've been dismissive, condescending, and honestly, just mean-spirited from the moment I sat down." Ruth tried again. "Ralf, I think we can—" "Ruth, with all respect to you, I can't do this," Ralf said, turning to her. His voice softened when he spoke to her. "You've been lovely. Jane, Nadia, you've both been great, but I'm not going to sit here and be belittled on national television." Denise scoffed. "Belittled? I asked you about your job. If you can't handle that—" "You didn't ask me about my job," Ralf interrupted, his voice firm and clear. "You insulted it. You insulted everyone who works on it. You sat there with this smug attitude, like you're somehow above it all, and then when I call you out on it, you act like I'm the problem." The studio was dead silent. Even the camera operators seemed frozen. This was not how these interviews were supposed to go. Denise's face was flushed now. "I am the host of this show, and I'll ask whatever questions I want to ask. And I'm a guest who doesn't have to sit here and take it," Ralf countered. "Being the host doesn't give you the right to be disrespectful. It doesn't give you the right to talk down to people." Jane Moore finally spoke up. "Maybe we should all just take a breath." "No, Jane, it's fine," Ralf said, standing up now. He started to remove his microphone. "I'm done here. This has been one of the most uncomfortable experiences I've had on television, and that's saying something." Denise stood up too, her face now showing real anger. "You can't just walk off. We're in the middle of a show." "Watch me," Ralf said simply. He handed his microphone to a producer who had rushed over, looking panicked. "This is so unprofessional," Denise said, her voice getting louder. "You agreed to be here." "I agreed to an interview," Ralf said, turning back to face her. "Not an ambush. Not whatever this was supposed to be. You know, I thought Loose Women was supposed to be about honest conversations, but this was just cruel." Nadia stood up, putting her hand on Ralph's arm. "Please, don't go like this. We can talk about something else." Ralf looked at her, and his expression softened again. "Nadia, you're very kind, but I can't stay. I have too much respect for myself and for the people I work with to sit here while she—" he gestured toward Denise— "tears us all down for entertainment." Ruth was shaking her head, looking between Ralf and Denise. "This has gotten completely out of hand." "Yes, it has," Ralf agreed. "And it didn't have to. All I wanted was to come here, talk about a show I love, maybe make some people laugh, and hopefully get a few more viewers interested. Instead, I got interrogated like I'd committed some crime by taking a job I enjoy." Denise crossed her arms. "If you can't handle tough questions—" "Tough questions?" Ralph's voice was louder now, and you could hear the frustration breaking through. "Tough questions would be asking me about the challenges of filming abroad, or how I prepare for a role, or what it's like working with the rest of the cast. What you did was just take shots at me, because what? You think it makes you look smart? It doesn't. It makes you look bitter." The audience gasped again. Someone in the back started clapping, but they were quickly shushed. Denise's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out for a moment. "I have been in this industry for decades," Denise finally said, her voice shaking with anger. "I don't need some actor who got lucky with a couple of shows telling me how to do my job. And I don't need some host who's forgotten how to treat people with basic decency telling me mine isn't good enough," Ralf shot back. "Lucky? I've been working since I was a kid. I've done theater, television, comedy, drama. I've earned every single opportunity I've gotten, and I'm not going to apologize for being successful or for enjoying my work." Jane stood up now, too. "Can we please just—" "No, let him finish," Denise said, her arms still crossed. Let him get it all out. Let everyone see what happens when someone can't take criticism. This isn't criticism, Denise, Ralf said, his voice echoing through the studio now. Criticism would be constructive. Criticism would come from a place of actually caring about the work. This was just you being nasty because you could be. Because you thought I'd sit here and take it with a smile. I thought you'd be professional, Denise retorted. Professional? Ralf laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about professional. A professional host makes their guests feel welcome. A professional host asks questions that actually further the conversation. A professional host doesn't spend the entire interview trying to make their guest look small so they can feel big. Ruth put her head in her hands. Nadia was biting her lip, looking like she might cry. Jane was staring at the desk. The other three women on the panel clearly wanted no part of this. Denise pointed at Ralf. You're being incredibly rude right now. I'm being honest, Ralf corrected. There's a difference. You've been rude since the moment I walked out here. I'm just finally saying what everyone in this studio is thinking. You don't speak for everyone, Denise said. Maybe not, Ralf agreed. But I speak for myself, and I'm saying I'm done. I'm not going to give you the satisfaction of sitting back down and pretending this is okay. It's not okay. You don't get to treat people like this. A producer was now on the side of the set, making frantic hand gestures. Someone in the control room was probably losing their mind. But Ralf wasn't paying attention to any of that. He was focused entirely on Denise. You know what the sad thing is? Ralf said, his voice quieter now, but somehow more powerful. I've watched this show. I've seen you all have brilliant conversations with guests. I've seen you be funny, insightful, and warm. I knew that's what you could be. That's why I said yes when they asked me to come on. But instead, you chose to do this. And I'll never understand why. Denise's face was red now, and she looked like she wanted to say something. But Ralf held up his hand. Don't. Just don't. Whatever you're about to say, it's not going to make this better. You've made your feelings about me and my work very clear. And I've made my feelings about being treated with respect very clear. So let's just leave it at that. He turned to the audience. I'm sorry you all had to see this. You came here for a nice afternoon of television, and instead you got, well, this. That's not fair to you. Some people in the audience called out, We love you, Ralf. And you're doing great. Ralf smiled at them, a real smile this time. Thank you. That means a lot. He looked back at the panel one more time. Ruth, Jane, Nadia, you're all wonderful. Thank you for trying to make this work. Then he looked at Denise. And you, I hope you think about how you speak to people. Because one day, you're going to do this to the wrong person, and they're going to do more than just walk off. With that, Ralf turned and walked toward the exit at the side of the set. His footsteps echoed in the silent studio. Every eye was on him. Denise stood there, frozen, her mouth slightly open. Ruth had her hand over her mouth. Jane was shaking her head slowly. Nadia had tears in her eyes. As Ralf reached the edge of the set, Denise finally found her voice. This is ridiculous! You're being ridiculous! Ralf stopped and turned back one last time. No, Denise. What's ridiculous is that you still think you're in the right here. What's ridiculous is that you can't see how badly you've handled this. But that's your problem, not mine. I'm leaving with my dignity intact. Can you say the same? He didn't wait for an answer. He pushed through the door at the side of the set and was gone. The studio remained silent for what felt like an eternity. Denise slowly sat back down, her face still red, her hands shaking slightly. Ruth looked at the camera, clearly trying to figure out what to say. Well, Ruth finally managed, her voice shaky. That was certainly... He was completely out of order, Denise interrupted, but her voice lacked conviction now. Was he, though? Jane said quietly, and everyone turned to look at her. Was he really, Denise? Denise glared at her. Are you seriously taking his side? I'm not taking anyone's side, Jane said carefully. But I am saying that was uncomfortable to watch. For all of us. Nadia nodded. It felt like we were attacking him. Like he said. We weren't attacking anyone, Denise insisted. I was asking legitimate questions. The way you asked them, though, Ruth said softly. Denise, love, that wasn't your best moment. Oh, so now you're all turning on me, Denise said, looking around at her co-hosts. I'm the villain now? Nobody's saying that, Nadia tried to reassure her, but maybe we need to think about how that came across. How it came across, Denise repeated. He walked off a live television show. That's what came across. After you spent 10 minutes making him feel awful, Jane pointed out. Can you honestly say you were being fair to him? Denise opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. The silence stretched out once more. Ruth turned to the camera. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have a different segment. The moment the cameras cut, chaos erupted on set. Producers rushed over. People were talking over each other. But through it all, Denise sat in her chair, staring at the spot where Ralf had been sitting just minutes before. I was just doing my job, she said to no one in particular. But the empty chair across from her seemed to disagree. The microphone Ralf had removed lay on the desk, a silent reminder of how badly things had gone wrong. The audience members were whispering to each other, some of them recording on their phones despite the rules against it. This was going to be everywhere within hours. Backstage, Ralf was being met by several crew members who all looked worried. One of the producers approached him cautiously. Ralf, I am so sorry. That should never have happened. It's not your fault, Ralf said, taking a deep breath. He was still shaking slightly from the adrenaline. But I meant what I said in there. I couldn't just sit there and take it. I know, the producer said. And honestly, good for you. That was painful to watch from back here. Another crew member brought him some water. You handled that really well, actually. You didn't swear. You didn't get personal beyond what needed to be said. You just stood up for yourself. Ralf took a long drink of water. I feel terrible, though. The audience didn't deserve that. The other women on the panel didn't deserve that. They were trying to keep things civil. They were, the producer agreed. But Denise, she was out of line from the start. We could all see it. Back on set, the break had ended. The cameras were rolling again. Denise had composed herself, but she looked rattled. Ruth was doing her best to steer the show back on track. Before we continue, Ruth said to the camera, we want to address what just happened. Our guest Ralf Little left the show. And we understand that was uncomfortable for everyone watching. He overreacted, Denise muttered, loud enough to be picked up by her microphone. Ruth shot her a look. I think we can all agree that the interview became tense, and perhaps we could have handled things differently. Perhaps, Jane said, raising an eyebrow. Ruth, come on. What do you want me to say, Jane? Ruth asked, a bit of frustration creeping into her voice. I want you to say what we're all thinking, Jane replied, that we should have done better, that our guest deserved better. Nadia nodded. I feel awful about it. He seemed like such a nice man, and he left here feeling attacked. Because he couldn't handle a few questions, Denise said, but her voice was weaker now. Denise, Ruth said firmly, I love you. You know I do. But those weren't just questions. That was, well, it was a bit much. Denise looked around at her co-hosts, all of whom were looking at her with varying degrees of concern and disappointment. For the first time since the interview had gone south, she seemed to realize that she was alone in her position. I thought I was being challenging, Denise said quietly. There's challenging and there's dismissive, Jane said gently. You crossed that line. The conversation continued, but the damage was done. The interview with Ralf Little which should have been a fun 15-minute chat about a beloved television show, had turned into something else entirely. It had become a moment that would be replayed, discussed, and analyzed. It had become a cautionary tale about what happens when a host forgets that their job is to illuminate their guests, not diminish them. And through it all, one image stuck in everyone's mind. The image of Ralf Little, a man who had come onto the show with a smile and enthusiasm, walking off that set with his head held high, refusing to be made small by someone who thought their position gave them the right to do so. It was a reminder that respect is a two-way street, that being a host doesn't mean you get to treat people however you want, that guests are human beings who deserve basic dignity and courtesy, regardless of what show they're on or what job they're there to promote. Denise had thought she was conducting a hard-hitting interview. She had thought she was being a tough, no-nonsense host who didn't let celebrities off easy. But what she had actually done was reveal her own insecurities and her own need to feel superior. She had taken a perfectly pleasant opportunity to have an engaging conversation and turned it into a confrontation that nobody wanted and nobody enjoyed. The worst part was, it had all been so unnecessary. Ralf Little had been ready to talk. He had been open, friendly, and willing to engage. But instead of meeting him where he was, Denise had decided to meet him with contempt. And when he'd refused to accept that contempt, when he'd stood up for himself and his work, she had acted as though he was the one being unreasonable. But the audience knew better. The crew knew better. Even her fellow panelists knew better. And Ralf Little knew better. That's why he walked off. Not because he couldn't handle criticism, not because he was being precious or difficult, but because he understood something that Denise seemed to have forgotten. That self-respect matters. That boundaries matter. That how we treat each other matters. As the show continued without him, as the panel tried to salvage what was left of the episode, Ralf was already in a car, heading away from the studio. He looked out the window at the streets of London passing by, and he thought about what had just happened. Part of him wondered if he'd done the right thing. Part of him worried about the fallout. But mostly he felt relief. Relief that he hadn't forced himself to sit through any more of that. Relief that he had listened to his instincts. Relief that he had stood up, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been made to feel small by someone who should have been lifting them up. The driver glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "Everything okay, mate?" Ralf smiled, a real smile this time. "Yeah," he said. "Yeah, I think it is." And it was. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to participate in your own diminishment. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is set a boundary and hold it, no matter how uncomfortable it makes other people. Ralf Little had done all of those things. He had walked onto that set as a guest, ready to share his work with the world. And he had walked off that set as a man who knew his worth and refused to let anyone convince him otherwise. Back at the studio, the show eventually ended. The audience filed out, already texting their friends and family about what they'd just witnessed. The crew started breaking down the set. The panelists gathered their things and prepared to leave. Denise sat in her dressing room, staring at her reflection in the mirror. She could hear people talking in the hallway, their voices low, but urgent. She knew they were talking about her, about what had happened, about the interview that had gone so spectacularly wrong. For a moment, just a moment, she let herself consider that maybe, just maybe, she had been the one in the wrong. That maybe Ralph's reaction hadn't been an overreaction at all. That maybe she had pushed too hard, been too harsh, and forgotten that the person sitting across from her was a real human being with real feelings. But then she shook her head and stood up. No, or she told herself. She had been doing her job. He had been too sensitive. That was his problem, not hers. Still, as she left the studio that evening and saw the trending topics on social media already filling up with clips and commentary about the interview, she felt a twist of uncertainty in her stomach. Because the narrative that was forming wasn't the one she had expected. People weren't calling Ralf unprofessional. They weren't saying he couldn't handle the heat. They were saying he was right to walk off. They were saying Denise had been cruel. They were saying they'd lost respect for her. They were saying that Ralf Little had shown more class and composure in 10 minutes than she had in her entire career. And maybe, just maybe, deep down, Denise knew they had a point.